I'm going to share my screen today as I get started. What I'm speaking on today is on the second half of Romans 8. And as I was reading through that second half of Romans 8, what I really found interesting is that it's one of those chapters or sections that, sorry, somebody's saying something. Sorry, let me just bring up share the screen now. It's one of those sections that's really a challenge to speak on unless you have the text up on the screen at the same time. Let me just get it up here so everybody can see. Can everybody see the title now? I'm hoping so. Yep. So we throughout COVID and while we've been in lockdown, I don't think anybody has spoken and used PowerPoint. So this is the first time. So a couple of things. I'm hoping my internet won't die out. If it does, be patient with me. We'll flip on a hotspot off of one of our phones and we'll go from there. The other thing is that cat's been meowing at the door. So if you hear a cat, just ignore the cat. So last week, Lyle talked about the first half of Romans up to chapter 7 or verse 17 of Romans 8. And what he talked about the life in the spirit and the death through sinful nature and spirit of adoption. If you look at this, I got to move my screen just a bit here so you're not seeing that. So I'm just going to read this. For as many of you are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness that we are children of God. And this was the end of what Lyle talked about last week. And the interesting thing here is that the Spirit bears himself out as that we are children of God, that we are adopted, and by whom we cry, and we can now cry out, Abba, Father. This carries on. And actually, if you think about the term adoption, the Romans would have understood adoption being like, and the Romans and the Christians at the time would have understood adoption as carrying on the Father's name and inheriting the Father. That means inheriting everything the Father has in terms of working the land or working their job and inheriting any of the fruits of the labor. That carries on into Romans 8:17, where Lyle left off. And if children, then heirs, and heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. So because we are children of God, we also suffer with him. But because of that, we also get the glory that goes along with being children and being adopted children of God and of Christ. So that's where we're leading off. For the text today, I'm going to ask Elise, who's going to read chapter 8, 18 through 30 for me. So it's up on the screen here, and I'll get her to read it.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. For we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. For we do not know that we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called. Whom he called, these he also justified. And whom he justified, these he also glorified.
Thanks, Lise. So today we're really going to be looking at, the very first verse of chapters 18 through 30, which is our text today, 18 really talks about, for I consider that the suffering this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory revealed us. So what we're really talking about today is the idea of present suffering and the hope of a future glory is the context of this chapter. And I want to, if we have any kids here today, you might think, have you ever thought about something that you had a future hope for? One of the things with the kids, they might be, oh, just a second, my battery is almost dead. 1 second. There we go. Didn't want to lose you there. So, when we think about future glory and hope, we might think of one might be that the kids might think of as Christmas presents under the tree. So, is that suffering? So, definitely future glory, and the kids are hoping that Christmas morning there won't be in the presents. But would we want to say that they're suffering to get it? I'm sure the kids would think they're suffering, but it's not really truly suffering. Another example that might you give, if you've ever hoped for something that you had to suffer maybe a long time to get it, and long suffering, but at the end would be worth it. I know we have at least one or two Toronto Maple Leafs fan. This might be an example of future long suffering. They haven't won the cup since 1967. Now, most Leaf fans today do not even, or have never had the opportunity to experience the glory of winning a Stanley Cup. Now, is this a really good example of what we're talking about here? The suffering that you need to do? Well, yeah, definitely the Leafs fans are suffering, but I don't know if it's the best analogy, because their chance of future glory is probably pretty low. At least anybody who's alive today. So probably not the best analogy. Another analogy that I might give is mountain climbing. Over the summer, we went with our home group. If you look at the left, that was Castle Mountain, Coliseum Mountain. Wendy and I climbed it, and we didn't suffer climbing up that mountain. But the neat thing about an analogy of mountain climbing, where you're present suffering for future glory, is you can see the mountain up in the distance, and you keep sort of seeing it, and you're climbing. And we didn't suffer very hard because we took the easy route. It was not very steep. It was twice as long, but we got up there and it was pretty easy to climb. The Cappers and the Langfords, and I think that was the two of them, and Jordan and Daniel, they decided they're going to take the shorter route, which was way steeper. And from our understanding, they suffered. And in fact, it was very, very steep, and they could see the same peak that we were doing as they were climbing. But they got to a point they had to actually turn around, and only Daniel and Jordan were able to make and meet us up at the top. Now, the other example I can give is when Wendy and I went and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro a couple of years ago. Now, this was different because, the first few days we started hiking, and it wasn't really much suffering. We were walking about basically as fast as you could crawl, because you had to go really slow or you would suffer, because you could actually get life-threatening conditions such as cerebral or pulmonary edema, which means that your lungs start to swell up, filled with fluid, your brain starts to swell, you get headaches, your intestines start to swell because you need low oxygen and low air pressure. And the first few days it was nothing. At the end of the first day, we were actually at the same elevation as the top of Mount Robson. The picture there on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro was actually 2 kilometers higher than the top of Mount Robson. Now, as we went on every single day, the suffering got worse and worse. At first, we weren't suffering. Nobody's got headaches. We were kind of joking. This is so easy. It's going to be simple. And it never got really steep throughout, but the suffering increased because of low air pressure, lack of oxygen. We had like 60% of the oxygen you have here. And the very last day, when we got up to the top, if you look at the gentleman in the middle, he climbed with us. He was in his mid to late 20s. he suffered and he started getting cerebral edema. Both Wendy and I suffer too. You throw up, you get diarrhea, you get headaches, you get everything, and you're so exhausted. It took us almost 12 hours to hike 5 kilometers. That's how slow you're going. And it's up as steep through snow and as steep. This is just the last day. But the gentleman in the middle, when we got to the top, because the suffering was so much that last day, you were so sick, and he broke down. I've never seen such an emotional outpouring of a person when he got to the top, because you suffered so much. That glory at the end, the picture on the left of it with Wendy and I hiking Coliseum, it was great. It was beautiful. But at the end, we didn't suffer very much. At the right, we suffered a lot. Does that mean you have to suffer a lot to experience the glory of God at the end? No. But it made it that much more sweeter. The gentleman in the middle, he actually got edema so bad that they had to rush him off the mountain, and he was completely delirious. And had he knocked down, it was very life-threatening for him. If he would have stayed up much longer, he could have died. So is this a good example of what Christ is talking about for suffering? In some ways it is, but I would actually argue that it's probably not the best example. The reason being is because once we got to the top, we had that glory of the experience at the top, but then it's done. You turn around, you go back, and that glory is over. And I think that the glory that Jesus is talking about here, it's not a one-time glory. You have the present suffering, but the glory isn't a one-time glory. It comes and it ends if you climb the mountain. But the glory that Jesus is talking about in the chapter is it's ongoing. Once you hit the glory, it's forever. It's eternal, which is why this is probably not the best example. If I give you the next example, the glory for creation, we're going to read through this chapter section here. It says, "For the earnest expectation of creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself will also be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of God, of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs until now." So the analogy earlier that I showed, where we were adopted and Father, and where we can cry out, "Abba, Father," and there were heirs of Jesus and heirs of God. It carries on here in that we're talking about the example of suffering and future glory is probably really well done with the idea of pregnancy. Now, as fathers, we all really understand what it was like for our wife, what pregnancy is right, or what it is like, right? We can really understand the suffering that women go through. Well, of course, that's not true. I know with Wendy, I watched her as we had 3 kids. Our first kid, she had to suffer through the pregnancy. There's also good things that happened throughout the pregnancy. But as she got closer and closer that day, the suffering got increased. She was uncomfortable. With Elise, she had to go on bed rest, and that was challenging. And then when she went into labor, she actually went through 3 days of labor with Josiah, and nothing happened. And then finally, it ended in a C-section. I watched her for 3 days. Was I suffering with her as best I could, but I couldn't experience it. But the beautiful thing at the end is you had all that patience you had to do to get through this suffering. But at the end, the baby was born, and it wasn't just the one time, oh, baby was born, and then you go on. And no, we actually had that baby with us. And I think that's why it's a really good example. Pregnancy and birth and labor is really good example of what Christ is talking about. Of course, we can't truly understand the glory that's to come. But this is probably the best analogy that I think we can, as humans, relate to, is because now you have that baby and you have a way to truly understand that the glory is forever and eternal. So you have that baby you can take home, and you can remember that suffering and what you went through to get to that glory. So the other thing is, I'm just going to get my notes here. The glory is also for all of creation. So when you look at it in this chapter too, so the glory was just not for us. It's all for all creations. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subject in hope. Because the creation itself will also be delivered from the bondage of corruption and glorious of liberty of children of God. So this is the creation is also waiting for that for the deliverance of and our redemption. It's not just us who are waiting for that redemption. It's like the whole creation, everything around us is just waiting for that time. This can actually be shown in Isaiah. So if I look at Isaiah 11:6-9, describes the creation, describes this redemption of creation on that day. So the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them. The cow and bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like an ox, like the ox. The nursing child shall play with the cobra's by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the seas. So not only is the suffering we go through as a whole for us, and as we go on to this next section, it is for us, but it's also for all the creation. So so when in this section says, for when I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed for us. Not only that, but we who also have the first fruits of Spirit, even ourselves. And again, we groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. So again, it uses that analogy of fatherhood and adoption and pregnancy as that eager anticipation of the redemption of our body. So the glory is not only for us, though, it's for creation. And again, if I relate that back to our climbing on Mount Kilimanjaro, if it was an easy climb, like the one we went to Coliseum Mountain last summer with the home group, yeah, it would have been great. You get to the top, the view is beautiful, but where it says, even we groan within ourselves. Yeah, we groaned within ourselves. I was sick. Wendy was sick. Our heads were just throbbing. We were so tired. But when you get to the top, that emotional release that you get when you get to the top, and the glory of getting to the top of that mountain because of the suffering we went through, was even that much sweeter than it would have ever been if it would have been an easy climb. For those of you who like climbing mountains, you probably really understand what I'm talking about. The interesting thing is, it's not just about, let me just get my computer. It's not just about, and this section doesn't just talk about the suffering and the glory. It talks a little bit about how it's going to happen. What I really found interesting is that it uses the words that the glory is going to be revealed in us. And the word revealed is shown here in chapters or sections, there are verses 18 and 19, where it says, the glory shall be revealed in us. And then in 19, it says, the creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the sons of God. And then at the very bottom, it talks about the liberty of the children of God. So this actually gives the feeling that as Christians, God has already put the glory in us. It's just waiting to be revealed. And even in this next section in verse 20, where it says, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected in hope. It's like God subjected, and we know this, subjected the all of creation, and the glory is already there in creation, and it's just waiting like a wound spring to be released for when it's revealed in us. So what's really beautiful about this is it's there. God's just waiting to reveal it in all of creation and in us, which is a really beautiful picture. I'm going to get Wendy now to read verses 18 to 30, or the text today, I'm going to read it in the Message version of the Bible, and we're going to be just about closing off with this. But what I found when I was reading through these verses, I stumbled across, I said, sometimes it's interesting to read them in different versions. So I pulled up the Message version, and the Message version does such a beautiful job about painting that picture of that kind of that wellspring just waiting to be revealed through the suffering and then the glory. And it really does a great job relating it to what Paul used as pregnancy as an example, or the analogy of waiting for the going through the suffering and glory. So as she reads through this, listen really carefully to those those little pieces of the narrative about the suffering and the analogy of pregnancy. I think the Message does a really good job with this.
That is why I don't think there is any comparison between the present hard times and the coming hard times. The created world itself can hardly wait for what's coming next. Everything in creation is being more or less held back. God reins it in until both creation and all the creatures are ready and can be released at the same moment into the glorious times ahead. Meanwhile, the joyful anticipation deepens. All around us, we observe a pregnant creation. The difficult times of pain throughout the world are simply birth pangs. But it is not only around us, it is within us. The Spirit of God is arousing us within. We're also feeling the birth pangs. These sterile and barren bodies of ours are yearning for full deliverance. That is why waiting does not diminish us, any more than waiting diminishes a pregnant mother. We are enlarged in waiting. We of course don't see what is enlarging us, but the longer we wait, the larger we become, and the more joyful our expectancy. Meanwhile, the moment we get tired in waiting, God's Spirit is right alongside, helping us along. If we don't know how or what to pray, it doesn't matter. He does our praying in and for us, making prayer out of the wordless sighs, our aching groans. He knows us far better than we know ourselves, knows our pregnant condition, and keeps us present before God. That's why we can be so sure of every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something good.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so as you read this in the Message version, I really saw some of those same sort of things coming out. Verse 25 in particular says, but the longer we wait, so the patience, the larger we become. This gives such a really good word image of this and the suffering we have, and just that expectancy of this as we just keep waiting. But the longer we wait, the larger we become, the more joyful our expectancy, and the more joyful that is going to be at the end of the day. So I'm just going to go to the next slide here. So last week, Lyle talked a bit about, he said chapter 8 is the diamond in Romans. And he said, verse 28 is the sparkle of the diamond. So verse 28 says, and we know that all things work together for those to good, to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. I know I used to always hear this, and I was always thinking that this verse meant the present suffering meant that we're also going to have present good, that is going to be happening. And it could mean that too. But if you look at the context of this verse, this whole verse is within that context of present suffering and future glory. And it's not to say and there's definitely examples of where we'll have present suffering. In James, consider all joy when you count the various trials, knowing that testing your faith produces endurance. There's definitely examples of present suffering that will lead to good and God working his purpose for his good. But in the context of this chapter, I think it's really talking about that future good. So the questions that we have today, if we want to break into groups for a few minutes, I know it's now just after 12. The question is, understanding the context of the chapter. When we read verse 28, are we anticipating the good in our present lives, or are we anticipating future glory? And the second part of the question is, how do we live in the anticipation described in Romans 8:18-20? Are we living in that anticipation of future glory? And when we encounter suffering, are we still pointing our eyes towards what that future glory is that Christ has for us?